Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back. Now, up until this point, everything that we have done has existed inside of its own class file. And so what I mean by that, if we go back to our first class, the Hello World program, we wrote a single class file, and then we put a single method, the main method, inside of it. And then all of our code just existed inside of that main method. Then when we wrote our second program, so for example, the myArithmetic, we went ahead and made another class file and put a main method into it. And again, all of our code just fell right inside of there. So this was its own separate standalone program from the first class that we wrote. Even though we included them all in the same project folder, they are pretty much their own standalone programs. And the same thing with our number guessing game. So we went ahead and just wrote a single file right here and put all of our code inside of that. So what we want to start doing to make things a little more interesting is break free from that pattern and start to create our own class files. So again, just to visualize what we've done, and this is just an example, we have our class file here, and we named it some class in this case, and then we have our main method, and then all of the code inside of that. And even when we have interacted with other classes, they've been classes that have existed inside the Java API by default, so we haven't really, seen those or handled them other than just importing them, as with the scanner class here. And then we went ahead and instantiated or created instances of those objects. So with the scanner class, you can see this line, and then again with the integer class, which we just went over last time, which is a wrapper class for the primitive type int. And again, the string class, everything that we've done has just followed a pretty linear pattern. And in some cases, we went ahead and wrote our own methods inside of our single class file. And in those cases, we were accessing them as static methods. So when we call that, we would reference it using public static. Here we are expecting a return type string, the name of our method, the parameter it was taking, so an integer, and then it would have to return that string type. So again, this is just an example, and we haven't actually used this in our code, but if you were to copy this and leave out these dots, this would run, and depending on what you enter here, it's just going to print that out. What we want to do is actually get away from staying inside of this one single class file. So we're going to go ahead today and create a separate file, and in the first case we're going to create a file with an .inp extension, which is a made-up extension. It's something that we're going to just name for input. And we want to take this text-based file and put in a couple of web URLs, and then we're going to use our Java program that we write to interact with that file. And then, so a few things that we just want to do here, we're going to use a scanner object, and the scanner, as you can see, we're using a while loop to control this. The while loop is going to, as long as we have another line, so while this scan has next or has something else to scan, we're going to take whatever is on each line, and I only outlined this one in red, but each of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines would be parsed through and stored in this string URL. So what we're going to be doing is using the scanner class, and we're going to specify input rather than system.in from the keyboard. We're going to be specifying a file from our file system. So file is another object that exists in the Java API. And the specific file we're going to point to is called websites.imp. That's this text file we're going to be creating. And this double slash that I put on the end is just used in this case because I'm developing on Windows. And here we have these two different cases where in Windows, anytime we have the location for one of our files, it starts from the C drive, and then we use these backslashes. But the problem with this is in Java, if you remember, let's say we were operating inside of a string and we wanted to put here is a quote and actually print out the quotation marks, we can't do that because that would end this string. So what we have to do is use this as an escape character. So when we're specifying our file name, once it sees this, it's going to expect that this letter U is some kind of an escape character. To bypass that, what we have to do is put a double slash every time we want to use one slash. And this only applies to Windows. In Linux, everything uses the forward slash. So we start from the root, and then we just work our way through our home directory like this. And so we don't have to worry about this escape character in Linux. So I'm going to be showing you developing from a Windows machine. So we're actually going to be using this. And it seems a little finicky when it happens, but sometimes you actually have to terminate after your extension with the double backslash. And then finally we're going to make use of the scanner method use delimiter, and we're going to specify this slash in order to parse our way through websites. So it's going to give us each portion based on until it finds this delimiter. So here it would give us this portion, and then it would see that slash, and then the next portion it wants to give us is this, and then it would stop at the slash, and then this portion here. And this will make a lot more sense when you start using this as an example in a minute. And then finally we're going to get into what are called the enumerator or enum types. So enumeration allows us to specify specific values for a given variable. So let's say we wanted to only allow certain weekdays to be used with our variable weekdays. We could specify it like this, which is similar to an array format. And then anytime we use this weekdays inside of our program, it's only going to be able to take on these values that we've specified. So again, here we're going to make some variables of the type weekday, day 1 and day 2, and then day 1, day 2 here can only take on these specific values. So let me just jump back here again, and you can see we've done that here, weekdays. And just note that this behaves somewhat like a class, so we're going to be writing this in our own separate file. And it also acts somewhat like an array in that we start with 0 indexing, and it has a definite amount of space. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days for our week, including Saturday. And also note that it ensures type safety, so again, you can't use the wrong value. Now, one thing I should note about this is we cannot specify integer values in here. Now, there are certain ways to work around that limitation, and I'm going to borrow an example from Oracle's own tutorial, and we'll cover this at the end. So let's just start with the first program we want to write, and go ahead and make a new project in Eclipse. And we'll just call this one websites. And now we're going to need 2 files, but the first one we're going to create and go down here, just make a file, and call this websites.inp and click finish. Now it put it in here, and that's not actually where I want it, so drag it up right into the main folder out of the source, and now it should pop up down there. So the first thing we want to go ahead and do is make a list of different websites that we want to parse through on separate lines. So we'll start with, let's just do maybe CNN.com. And then on the next one, let's leave out the HTTP. We'll do Stack Overflow /index.html. And then let's go back and use HTTPS. Let's do www.twitter.com. HTTP. Let's do reddit.com/r/Java. And I thought I had one more, not that I can't think of another website, but to keep it somewhat similar, Yeah, we can do Google. So we now have 5 there, and that's good enough. So just Control S to save it. And now let's go ahead and right-click on our source folder, and now we'll create our Java program. So let's just name this dissect url.java. And this is going to parse through, I should say scan, since we're using the scanner object, scan through a text file .imp and separate URL into parts. Public class dissect URL, and now our main method. So okay, so to start with, we know we need a scanner object, and we're actually going to need 2 of them. So let's go ahead and make scanner, and we'll say we want to scan through the file, so file scan, and then we're also going to want to do a URL scan to break up the various parts of the URL. So let's go ahead and import the scanner now. And now we're going to want a string to handle the storage of our different parts of the URL. So we'll just name that URL. And now give yourself some room. And the first thing you want to do is specify our file scanner. So go ahead and put file scan equals new scanner. And now here we want to tell it to scan through our websites.imp. So to do that, we're going to tell it, give it a new file, and point it to websites. Now, I don't have to give it the full path because it's going to, by default, just look in the local directory for this project. So I can just go ahead here and do websites.inp and put my // there. And now close that out. And now I should do Control-Shift-O, and I'm going to import the file class, which is located in the package java.io. And now it's giving us a problem here. So it wants us to surround this with either the try catch, or we can add the throws declaration. And again, this starts to get into what's known as exception handling, which is a later topic to learn, but we can start by, let's just go ahead and use the try catch. So it's going to try to do this, but if it fails for some reason, it might catch this file not found exception. And here we can tell it to print stack trace, which is a way we can debug our program. So this is going to give us a lot of output about prints this throwable and its backtrace to the standard error stream. So this is going to help us to figure out exactly what's going on with our error and why we've received it. And feel free to also make your own little comments in here. So I can say the website's file was not loaded for some reason. I don't know, put whatever you want there. And this way, when it does come to debugging later, you can see this line and go, okay, now I need to figure out where that happens and why. So the next thing we want to do is, okay, so that worked. Now let's put a while loop, and we want to say while our file scan has next, returns true if the scanner has another token in its input. So as long as that file still has more items to scan, this will keep looping through. And the next thing we want to do is take our URL, which is a string, and store into it the next line, which, if I go back to our websites, so this would be the first line that would be stored into that URL. But what we want to do is parse through it and print the first portion of it and then the next portion. And each time that it incurs a slash, it's going to break it up into separate strings. So the way that we would do that is, now we want to use our URL scanner, so we have to specify that. So URL scan equals new scanner, and specifically we want to give it a parameter here, so we can give it file, input stream, path, readable, and here's one for string. So we're going to give it our string and let it scan through that string. And specifically, we want to tell this to use delimiter, and we want to give it a pattern. And in this case, we want to use just the / as our delimiter. And now we can go ahead and say while URL scan dot has next. So same concept as this one. Let's go ahead and print out and then we'll just add another blank line, and this is going to help to keep everything well spaced out. Now that was complaining because it wanted us to initialize the variable, so here we can use the null to do that and get rid of that little error. And now finally we want to go here, and then at the end of it we want to make sure that we close our two scanners. So we want to do file scan, close, and then also take our, we should probably close the URL scanner first. And again, set that one to null. So let's go ahead now and run this, and let's view the output full screen. So what we did was we took, actually I'll bring that back so we can see what it's doing. We took the first portion of this URL and we printed it there, and then we took the next portion of it and we printed it here, and then we went on to the next line, and this line we broke up as this portion, and then the delimiter, and then the index.html. Now for the next one we had HTTPS as the first portion, and then we had twitter.com here for the second part, and then again HTTP, it hit that delimiter, and then reddit.com, and then the R, and then the Java, and then finally there was no delimiter in this one, so we just got that full URL. The reason why we have all of these blank lines, so for HTTP, it got to this delimiter, and now it went and found another delimiter, and we had specified that we wanted a blank line between each of them, and that's what we were doing right here. So in the case where it didn't find any kind of a string to store, it's still going to go ahead and print that blank line. And there we have it. We've just used a separate file and we've interacted with that from within our program. So this is just a very basic tutorial, and it's not something you would probably do, but if you wanted to start parsing through log files or interacting with other files inside of your Windows system, or Linux or whatever operating system, you can do that, and you can point to it using this file object or the file class. And again, just remember, depending on which platform you're working on, you want to use either this format or this. And I believe this is the format for Mac as well. So this really only pertains to those of you using Windows. Now, the next thing we want to do is start to use the enumeration types. So let's go ahead and close this project. And let's create a new project here. We'll name this Enumeration. And we want to create two different Java files. So we'll start with our weekdays.java. Oh, that was the name. I got to change that. So actually, in Eclipse, if you ever need to change the name of something, you can go ahead here to refactor, and that'll allow you to change it. So we want to right click and create a new file, and we want weekdays.java. And now, rather than making a class declaration, we want this to be an enumeration. So go ahead and just type enum weekdays and then the bracket, and then we're just going to go right ahead and name all of the weekdays that we want to include. So we'll do Monday and then a comma, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Control S to save it. And that's all we have to do for this one file. So now we'll go back here to this default package, right click, and create a new file. And in this case, let's just go ahead and call this calendar.java. And at the top, I'll just specify this will use an outside enumeration class file. Now, it's not technically a class, but it's something that I'm using just to kind of help us transition into creating our own classes. And we'll be creating those in their separate files, just like we've done here. So our public class calendar. And then this is going to have our main method. So public static void main string. And now we want to create some instances of this enumerated type. So weekdays, and let's just name them day 1, day 2, and day 3. So the first thing that you can do is go ahead and do weekdays and put the dot, and we can see all of the possibilities that we have. So we have all of these specific values, and then we also have these 3 static methods, value of, values, and we can go ahead and we'll use those in a minute. We can also take the specific variables, so day 1, and we have all these methods available to them, as well as these variables. So let's go ahead and say day 1 is going to equal weekdays dot, and then we can select from any one of these. Day 2 is going to equal weekdays and day 3 let's go ahead. So now we can go ahead and just do our print statement, and we can say day day 1, and let's do the %s. So I'm going to change this now to a format print, comma, day 2, %s, and day 3, %s, and then a %n at the end. And now I want to replace each of these with a specific string. So go ahead and do day 1, day 2, day 3. And if we go ahead and print that, we have day 1 is Monday, day 2 is Tuesday, day 3, Catterday. Now, alternately, what we can do is use our enhanced for loop, and we can go through each and every one of those one at a time. So the way we would do that is for, and now we want to do week, day, single variable, so D, then the colon, and now we'll just do week, days, dot, values, and I think I forgot that. There we go. So in each case, we can just go ahead and print out our D variable, and you'll see that it's going to print out each of the possibilities that exist inside of this. So in a way, here it's acting just like an array would, and we're parsing through it using our enhanced for loop, one value at a time. We can also do week days dot I thought we could get the position, so let's go ahead and say day 1 ordinal. There it is. So let's just print this out. Rather than that, let's go ahead and do system.out.println, and we'll do D ordinal, and we'll see what that does. So here we have Monday, and Monday occurs at the ordinal position 0, and then Tuesday occurs at 1, and then finally we get Sunday at 7. The total length of this is 8 values, and this just really helps us see that this is position 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, sorry, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the total is 8 values. And so now finally we can get into that really advanced one, which I can't take credit for. This was part of the official Oracle tutorials, but let's go ahead and name this Enum Planets. What am I doing? Right click, new Java project. Okay. Enum Planets. Right click and create a new file, and I already have the code for it written here. We're going to go ahead and name this just planet. So in our other example, which we just did, weekdays, we had 2 separate files, and we did our enumeration inside of a separate file. We could have, by all means, copied and pasted this right at the top. And this would have worked all the same for us. What that would have kind of acted like is an internal class. And that's what you're going to see here. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste this in, because I can't remember all of these different values, and I'll explain exactly what it is doing in a minute. So the first portion of it, let me just break this up a little bit more, and the first portion of this is our enumeration, and we're specifying this, and we're also giving it some parameters. So each of these planets has its own parameters, and the first one pertains to, and if we come down here, I'll show you that we have two values here. We have the mass and the radius for our enumeration type. Now, each planet is going to use this constructor, and it's going to expect two parameters. The first one being the mass, so that's what these are, and the second one is going to be the radius, so that's what these are. And what we're doing is once we send in this mass value, we're going to set it equal to this mass, which means the mass here. And again, you can see this radius is stored into radius, which sets this variable. And then we have two methods which just return the mass and the radius for the given planet type. So all of that happens kind of separately from all of this. I broke that a little early. Okay, it ends right about here. And so once we get here, this is where we're actually going to start our program running. And this might be a little confusing, so again, if this throws you off, just kind of ignore all of this. What we're doing here is finally making use of this string args that we've been using this whole time and just kind of ignoring. What this does is it takes parameters or specific values from the command line when we launch our program initially, and it does something with them. So all this is doing is checking that we have only specified one parameter when we launched it. So if we had 0 or if we had 5 or anything that wasn't 1, for example, this would throw an error here. It's going to tell you exactly how to use it and then exit the program. That only happens when, again, this is true, and this is only true when we don't use the correct number of parameters. In this case, just one parameter. So then we're going to specify a double value, earth weight, and that's going to equal to whatever we specify as our argument, and then a mass value, which is going to be equal to whatever that parameter was, our weight, divided by Earth, which is a planet up here, surface gravity. So we're going to call Earth, use these parameters, and then call the function surface gravity, which is here. Surface gravity is going to take this constant g. It's going to multiply it by our mass. So Earth mass is this value here. And then the radius squared, which rather than using the math power function, they just went ahead and used radius times radius. So this is going to then return this entire value as a double. And where did we call it again? It's going to store all of that inside of mass. And then finally we're going to go through each planet and print those values, which we did in our previous example. This is the enhanced for loop. And specifically it's going to print your weight on each one of those planets. So let's just go ahead and save this and run it. And it gives us this error because we can't run it unless we specify an argument. So in this case, we got to this statement right here because we didn't put a single value in. Now, the way you can do that from Eclipse is if we go up here, we're going to click this little arrow, go down to Run Configurations, wait for this window to pop up, and you can see this tab here for arguments. So we want to put some kind of a value here, and it's expecting our Earth weight. So just go ahead and put in, let's say 175 for 175 pounds, and we're going to apply that. And now go ahead and run the program. And this time it runs properly. So I'm going to take this as an opportunity to show you how to launch programs from the command line because it all ties in what we're doing here. The way we can easily do that in Windows is go to the folder wherever your projects are being stored in. Usually it's in your home folder in a folder called Workspace. In my case, it's a little bit different, but we'll go ahead to Workspace, and then I believe it's in Introduction, and now we're inside of this Enum Planets, and now I want you to go ahead into the bin folder. So the source holds your actual .java files, but then they get translated into class files, and to get to those you want to go into the bin folder. And now again, if you're in Windows, hold Shift and right click, and now you get this option to open a command window here. So what we want to do, and you know what, let me let's backtrack. So let's do cd space // and now do src. Now we're in the source folder. And to check what files are actually in there, we can do dir, and that's going to list. And we can see we have this planet.java file. What we would want to do is compile this using the Java compiler. So this is the first step. And Eclipse does all of this in the background for us. So to use the Java compiler, type out javac space and then the name of your file or files. In this case, we only have one, so it's planet.java. And now hit enter. And once you get your command prompt back, the next thing you want to do is, we can just double check, do dir again, and you can see now we have this planet.class. So go ahead to run that. We're going to type java and planet again, but without the extension. So you don't want to type .java and you don't want to fill out the .class. Go ahead and hit enter. And you're going to see we'll get that same error which we had seen in Eclipse. Let me just open that up. We're running into this problem here because we didn't specify any parameters. So go ahead and do java space planet again and then space, and then go ahead and put in 175 and hit enter. And now the program runs as expected and it closes out and we get back to our command prompt. So here we've run our first project from the command line, and now to exit out of this you can do that. So what we did when we specified 175 from the command line is we started our program running at this main method and we gave it a specific value. And since this is a string array, it can hold any number of arguments that we specify. And if we had wanted to, I'm not on the command line anymore, we could have done java planet, and we did 175, which is just a single argument. If we wanted more, we could have done a space, and then let's say we did hello. This would have been a second parameter stored into this array. Now again, arrays are 0 indexed, so this occurs at index 0, this would occur at 1, and so on. In this case, we would have gotten an error as well because our arguments.length would have been, in this case, 2. Now, if we had wanted to handle that number as a numeric value, what we have to do is then parse through this string array and convert those to integer values or double or whatever we want to convert it to. And the way we would have done that, let me just do this temporarily, is args at 0 dot, and now we could have used our parse, if I can find it. Rather, not parse, but what we would have actually had to do is integer dot parse int, and now it expects a string, so then we would have taken our arguments 0. So this would say take whatever argument was first given from the command line, In our case, we did 175. And now it's going to take that from the string and parse it as an integer. And of course, we would have needed an int value. So this is also using a combination of auto boxing to move it into here and our methods from our number classes. And here you can see they've done double, parse double on this argument array with our value. So that's exactly what they're doing in their code right here. Now, I know this is actually pretty confusing just looking through it, but if you can work your way through this, it'll be very beneficial to you, and don't get overwhelmed by all these numbers. All you have to do is kind of follow the trail of highlighting, and you can see which values are set where and why. And that pretty much covers our use of enumeration types. So we're going to actually branch out in the next tutorial and start to create multiple different class files and use those just as we have with other classes like the string class, the scanner class. We're going to create our own methods and really start to create some dynamic programming. So thanks for watching, and check out the next tutorial.